Once upon a time, there was a young boy who loved his sheep and loved his music. Nobody really knew him outside his small town. But after an unexpected visit from God's prophet, boom! His life was changed forever, and his name is the most commonly used one in the King James Version of the Bible. This is the story of David. Growing up, David is humble, quickly obedient, and always looks to God for guidance. So the Lord continually strengthens him. For example, one day, while watching his flock, a bear comes out of nowhere and attacks his sheep. But with the Lord, David courageously rescues his lambs and kills the bear. With this same faith, David later rescues Israel from the Philistines by slaying Goliath. Now after this, King Saul makes David one of his closest aides. And David, with the Lord's help, is wildly successful, winning victory after victory, and goes viral. However, Saul, pretty much used to being the GOAT, becomes insanely jealous. So he starts chucking javelins at David.
Huh?
What? Fortunately, his aim is pretty bad. Later, he even tries to have him killed in battle. Foreshadowing. And Saul's illogical hatred sends David into hiding for many years. While on the run, David's given Goliath's sword by Ahimelech the priest, and, still with the Lord's help, is victorious in every battle. Saul and his sons, however, aren't so lucky, and are killed by the Philistines. Their deaths break David's heart, and the Lord leads him to Judea, where he's made king at only 30 years old. And by 37, he's united and transformed Israel into one nation, becoming its greatest king. Now, as king, David shows his true greatness by seeking to take care of Saul's posterity, but only finds one grandson of Saul still alive, a poor crippled man named Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth can't walk, as both of his feet were broken as a child while fleeing after Saul was killed. Placed before King David, Mephibosheth immediately bows himself flat, probably scared for his life. But David says not to worry, explaining, "I'm restoring everything that was Saul's to you. Oh, and I'd like you to always eat at my table." Totally flabbergasted, Mephibosheth stammers, "Why me? Such a dead dog as I am?" But David doesn't care if Mephibosheth is considered among the lowest, and loves him as he did Saul and Jonathan. After all, wasn't he once himself a lowly sheep herder? And David grew great, and the Lord was with him, as long as he always looks to the Lord. Now, wouldn't it be nice to just end the story here? Oh, you betcha. Unfortunately, there's a time when David didn't accompany his army to battle and finds himself in a compromising situation. Sauntering across his rooftop, he looks down from his great palace and sees Bathsheba bathing. Okay, look, we don't know how long David was struggling to diligently look upward, but here and now, his defenses fall as he pursues her and sins against God. Worst of all, instead of immediately looking upward for forgiveness and heavenly grace, he desperately tries to secretly fix his mistake by having Bathsheba's husband Uriah sent to the battlefront to be killed. And with Uriah dead, David marries Bathsheba. Perhaps breathing an uneasy sigh of relief because he thinks he's fooled everyone, David happily welcomes in Nathan the prophet, who pops in for a visit. And the prophet proceeds to tell David a sad, true story of two men, one rich and one poor. Nathan says, "This rich man had tons of flocks and herds, but the poor man had only one little lamb that he'd raised with his children, would eat from his own plate, drink from his own cup, and would even sometimes adorably fall asleep on his chest." Ah. But one night, when the rich man entertained a traveler, instead of taking from his own flock, he took and killed the poor man's lamb for dinner. Furious, David shouts, "This rich man must pay!" Nathan then calmly looks David in the eye and softly says, "David, thou art the man." And with a sudden, stinging realization of his own tragic mistake, David completely breaks down in sinful sorrow and seeks forgiveness for the rest of his life. Now, despite losing phenomenal blessings and protections because he broke his covenant with God, David's life wasn't over, nor did the Lord completely forsake him. Instead, David worked with Nathan to help him acknowledge his sins and repent, just like God gives us loving church leaders to help us in our hours of deepest regret, remorse, and despair. Finally, years later, as David lies on his deathbed, his wicked son Adonijah conspires to become the next king. Bathsheba reminds David of his promise to have their son Solomon succeed him as king. And in a burst of heavenly strength, David sits up and clearly instructs Nathan to take Solomon to Gihon and anoint him as king. Then, foreshadowing Jesus' own triumphal entry, Solomon rides King David's mule down the Kidron Valley into Jerusalem, accompanied by blasting trumpets and people shouting, "God save King Solomon! God save King Solomon!" Now we know Solomon is subsequently blessed with the greatest judgment, wisdom, and riches above all other kings. But, like David, it doesn't end well when Solomon too stops looking upward to the Lord. Nonetheless, the Lord still keeps his promised blessings to David's posterity, just as he will with each of us as we continually seek after him. Next, we'll see the prophet Elijah take on the wicked priests of Baal. It takes a lot to make these videos, so to keep Line Upon Line free for everyone, consider donating through Patreon. The link's in the description below. And thanks for watching. This episode is packed with info, so you might want to watch it again to make sure you didn't miss anything, including the hilarious jokes. If you feel this video has helped you on your path towards truth and Christian discipleship, please subscribe and share. Most importantly, go read the scriptures for yourself.